I never imagined my life would come to this, a web of lies, betrayal, and desperation. Ethan and I had been together for 3 years. Our love was passionate but overshadowed by constant financial struggles. The bills piled up, and no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't seem to catch a break. Our landlord, Mr. Green, was patient at first, but his kindness had its limit. The overdue rent became a ticking time bomb. "You need to figure this out, Mia," Ethan said one evening, his tone filled with frustration. "We can't keep living like this." "I know," I replied, my voice trembling. "I'm trying, Ethan, I really am." The knock on the door that night sent a chill down my spine. It was Mr. Green, his expression unreadable. "Mia, we need to talk," he said, stepping into the apartment. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the signs of our struggles. "We're working on it," I said quickly, avoiding his gaze. "We just need a little more time." Mr. Green's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Time isn't something I can afford to give anymore." The tension in the room was suffocating. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned against the wall, his gaze fixed on me. "There's always another way to settle a debt, Mia." His words hung in the air, and the implication was clear. My stomach turned, but I couldn't ignore the desperation gnawing at me. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice trembling. "Just give me a little more time." Mr. Green nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'll expect an answer soon," he said before leaving. That night, I couldn't sleep. Ethan lay beside me, blissfully unaware of the weight of the decision I faced. The next day, I met Mr. Green at his office. The atmosphere was cold, and I could feel the judgment in his gaze. "Have you made up your mind?" he asked, his tone casual, as if this were a normal conversation. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. "If I do this, the debt is cleared, right?" "Completely," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "You have my word." My heart raced as I nodded, feeling the weight of my decision settle heavily on my chest. "Good," Mr. Green said, his tone smug. "Let's meet tomorrow evening here at the office." I left his office, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, shame, and fear all fought for dominance. At home, Ethan noticed my distant demeanor. "Mia, is everything okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I forced a smile, shaking my head. "Just tired," I replied, avoiding his eyes. The next day passed in a blur. By the time the evening arrived, my nerves were frayed, and I felt like I was walking to my doom. Mr. Green greeted me with a confident smile, ushering me into his office. The room was dimly lit, adding to the unease I felt. "You're making the right choice," he said smoothly, pouring himself a glass of wine. I didn't respond, my hands clenching into fists at my side. "Let's just get this over with," I said, my voice trembling. Mr. Green set his glass down and stepped closer. "Relax, Mia," he said, his tone almost mocking. "This will be easy." I closed my eyes, trying to push aside the rising panic. The weight of my decision pressed down on me like a crushing burden. Afterwards, I left the office feeling hollow, my mind racing with regret and self-loathing. When I got home, Ethan was waiting for me, a warm smile on his face. "I made dinner," he said cheerfully. I froze in the doorway, guilt crashing over me like a wave. "Thanks," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. As we ate, Ethan spoke about his day, completely unaware of the betrayal I carried in my heart. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence was deafening, and the weight of my actions felt unbearable. I wanted to tell Ethan the truth, but the fear of losing him kept me silent. The following weeks were a blur of guilt and secrecy. I avoided Mr. Green as much as possible, desperate to move on. But the debt was cleared, and for a brief moment, I felt a small sense of relief. Yet every time Ethan looked at me with love in his eyes, the guilt threatened to consume me whole. One evening, Ethan brought up a conversation I had dreaded. "Mia, you've seemed distant lately," he said, his tone full of concern. I froze, my heart pounding. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just stressed about everything." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" His sincerity cut through me like a knife. I nodded, unable to meet his gaze, guilt suffocating me. That night, I sat alone in the living room, my mind replaying every choice I had made. The weight of my secret was unbearable. The next morning, I decided to confront Mr. Green. I couldn't live like this anymore, and he needed to know it was over. When I arrived at his office, his smirk greeted me like a slap in the face. "Mia, what a surprise," he said smoothly. "This ends here," I said firmly, my voice shaking but determined. "You got what you wanted. Leave me alone." Mr. Green leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "As you wish," he said, his tone laced with mock amusement. As I walked out of his office, I felt a sliver of relief, but the damage had already been done, and I couldn't undo it. At home, Ethan was waiting for me, his expression serious. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. I froze, my stomach churning. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I spoke to Mr. Green," Ethan said, his eyes filled with pain. "He told me everything. The air was knocked out of me." "Ethan, I can explain," I began, tears streaming down my face. He shook his head, his expression a mix of anger and heartbreak. "How could you, Mia? I trusted you. I did it for us," I sobbed. "We were drowning in debt, and I didn't know what else to do." Ethan's voice broke as he replied, "You should have come to me. We could have figured it out together." Silence filled the room, the weight of my betrayal hanging heavily between us. "I need time to think," Ethan said finally, turning away. "I don't know if I can forgive this." As he left the apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, my tears falling freely. I had lost the one person who mattered most. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between Ethan and me grew louder. He stayed at a friend's place, leaving me to face my guilt alone. I threw myself into work, trying to escape the endless replay of our last conversation. But no matter how busy I kept, the emptiness remained. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos of us, Ethan's easy smile, the way he held me like I was his whole world. The realization hit me like a freight train. I had shattered something beautiful, something. Unable to sit with my regret any longer, I decided to call him. The phone rang endlessly before going to voicemail. "Ethan, it's me," I said, my voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am." The words spilled out, unfiltered and raw. "You deserve better, and I failed you. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it, even if you never come back." I ended the call, my chest heaving as tears streamed down my face. I had said my piece, but the void felt no smaller. The following weekend, there was a knock at the door. My heart raced as I opened it to find Ethan standing there, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone softer than I expected. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The air between us was heavy with unspoken words as we sat down on the couch. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but pained. "About us, about what happened, about everything." I held my breath, afraid of what he would say next. "Ethan, He raised a hand to stop me. "Let me finish," he said. "I'm angry, Mia, angry and hurt, but I also can't stop loving you." His words hit me like a tidal wave, and tears welled up in my eyes. "Ethan, I don't deserve you," I whispered. "Maybe not," he replied, his tone lighter now. "But love isn't about deserving. It's about trying, even when it's hard." He reached for my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "If we're going to do this, we need to rebuild from the ground up with honesty." I nodded, my heart swelling with a mix of relief and determination. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes," I said. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Together, we could face anything. That night, as Ethan stayed for dinner, the laughter we shared felt like a fragile new beginning, and I vowed never to betray his trust again. The next few weeks were filled with long conversations and difficult truths. Ethan wanted to understand every detail, and I owed him that. We talked late into the night, unpacking the reasons behind my decisions, the guilt I carried, and the fears that drove me. It wasn't just the debt, I admitted one evening, my voice shaking. I was scared of losing everything. I panicked. Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that, Mia. he said quietly. But I wish you had trusted me enough to face it together. His words stung, but they were true. Trust had been the missing piece, and now rebuilding it felt like climbing a mountain. One day, as we sat on the couch reviewing our finances, Ethan looked at me with a faint smile. You know we're going to be okay, right? I nodded, my chest tight with emotion. Because we're doing it together this time, I replied, gripping his hand tightly. We started setting small goals, cutting expenses, picking up extra work, and slowly chipping away at the financial strain that had haunted us. It wasn't easy, but with each small victory, we felt more like a team, more like the couple we used to be. One evening, Ethan surprised me by pulling out a photo album. Do you remember this? He asked, pointing to a picture of us on our first trip together. I smiled, tears welling up in my eyes. Of course, I said. We got lost trying to find that hiking trail, and you insisted we were going the right way, he added, laughing, even though the map clearly said otherwise. For the first time in what felt like forever, we laughed together, a deep, genuine laughter that felt like healing. That night, as we sat on the floor surrounded by old photos, I realized how far we had come and how much we still had to fight for. I love you, Ethan, I said softly, my voice breaking. And I'm so sorry for everything. He leaned in, resting his forehead against mine. I love you too, Mia, and I'm not giving up on us. From that day forward, we worked not just on our finances, but on the trust and love that had once defined our relationship. It wasn't perfect, and there were days when the past still haunted us, but we faced it together, one step at a time. Love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard. And as Ethan and I rebuilt our lives, I knew that the foundation we were laying now was stronger than ever. A few months later, we reached a major milestone. Our debt was finally paid off. The relief was overwhelming. Ethan planned a small celebration, a quiet dinner at home, just the two of us. It was simple, but it felt like a victory. As we sat at the table, candles flickering softly, Ethan raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, his eyes filled with hope. To us, I added, clinking my glass against his. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly optimistic about the future. Our relationship wasn't the same as before, it was stronger. The cracks had been filled, but they were a reminder of what we had overcome. One evening, Ethan surprised me with an envelope. I've been saving for this, he said with a grin. Inside was a pair of plane tickets, a weekend getaway, he explained. Just you and me, no worries, no distractions. Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him tightly. This means so much, I whispered. Thank you. The trip was exactly what we needed. Long walks on the beach, late night conversations, and a chance to reconnect. As we stood by the ocean, the waves lapping at our feet, Ethan took my hand. I'm proud of us, he said softly. So am I replied, my voice steady. The sound of the ocean felt like a clean slate, a fresh start. When we returned home, things felt different in a good way. The weight we had carried for so long was finally gone. We started planning for the future, talking about dreams we had once put on hold. Ethan suggested starting a small business together, something we both could be passionate about. The idea excited me, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were building something together, brick by brick. Looking back, I realized that while the path we took was painful, it taught us resilience and the true meaning of partnership. We weren't perfect, but we were real, and that was enough. As Ethan and I stood in our new shop on opening day, surrounded by friends and family, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. We had turned our struggles into strength, our pain into purpose, and that made all the difference. Love isn't about never breaking, it's about having the courage to put the pieces back together. Months after opening the shop, business was thriving. Ethan and I had found a rhythm, both professionally and personally. One evening, as we closed up, Ethan turned to me with a mischievous smile. I have a surprise, he said, pulling out a small box. My breath caught as he opened it, revealing a delicate necklace with a tiny charm. For everything you've been through and for everything we've built together, he said. Tears welled up in my eyes as I let him fasten it around my neck. It's beautiful, I whispered, my voice filled with emotion. That night, as we sat together on the couch, the weight of our journey felt lighter. Do you ever think about how far we've come? I asked. All the time, Ethan replied, his smile soft. And I wouldn't change a thing. Even the hard parts made us who we are. As time passed, we began talking about starting a family, a conversation we had avoided during the chaos of our past. The idea excited and terrified me in equal measure, but with Ethan by my side, I knew we could face anything. A year later, we welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby boy. Holding him for the first time, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't known was possible. Ethan was a natural father, his patience and kindness shining in every interaction with our son. Watching him, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we had come, from broken trust to a life filled with love and hope. Our shop continued to flourish, becoming a cornerstone of the community. People admired not just our work, but the bond we shared. One evening, an older couple came into the shop, their hands intertwined. "What's your secret?" the woman asked, smiling warmly. Ethan and I exchanged a glance, both of us smiling. "Never giving up," he said simply, his hand resting on mine. As the years passed, our family grew, and so did our love. The pain of the past became a distant memory, replaced by the life we had built together. And through it all, one thing remained constant: our commitment to each other, even when it wasn't easy. Because love isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about finding the strength to overcome them together. Years turned into decades, and our once chaotic life transformed into a steady, fulfilling rhythm. Ethan and I watched as our children grew up, each carving their own paths while carrying the values we had worked so hard to instill. One summer evening, as we sat on the porch of our home, the sounds of laughter echoed from the backyard where our grandchildren played. Ethan handed me a glass of iced tea, his smile as warm and genuine as it had been on the day we met. "We did good, didn't we?" he asked, his voice soft but full of pride. I looked at him, my heart swelling with gratitude. "We really did," I replied, resting my hand on his. Our shop became a legacy passed down to our eldest daughter, who poured her heart into it just as we had. Though we retired, Ethan and I often visited, sharing stories with loyal customers who had been with us since the beginning. One day, as we walked along the beach near our home, Ethan stopped and turned to me. "Do you remember that first trip we took when we got lost trying to find the trail?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. I laughed, shaking my head. "I still think we were going the right way," I teased. He chuckled, pulling me close. "Lost or not, I'd follow you anywhere, Mia," he said, his voice filled with love. The sun set behind us, casting a golden glow over the waves. In that moment, I knew that every choice, every challenge, had led us to this. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, built on forgiveness, resilience, and a love that refused to break. As we walked back hand in hand, I realized that true happiness wasn't about avoiding mistake. It was about finding the courage to keep moving forward together. And so we continued our journey, not as perfect people, but as two souls who chose each other again and again. Our story wasn't without flaws, but it was real. It was ours, and that made it beautiful. As we grew older, our love only deepened, a testament to the strength we found in each other. Because in the end, love isn't about never falling. It's about rising together, no matter how many times life tries to pull you down.